The light was the first thing to go. It was a single bulb hanging from a cord, bare and brutal, and it had been burning the truth into the woman's face for hours. She was tied to a chair, her head slumped, but her eyes were still sharp when she looked up at me. Then the bulb blinked once, twice, and died, plunging the concrete room into absolute blackness. The silence that followed was heavier than the dark. The deep, steady drone of the air filtration unit was gone, replaced by a high-pitched whine from a battery that was already failing. Then that whine died too, and the only sound left was the air. It came through the vents with a faint hiss, carrying the scent of the world outside, a smell of ozone and something sweet like overripe flowers. It was the smell of failure. My thoughts began to fray at the edges, like old rope. I had her name on a piece of paper in my pocket. I had the documents. I had everything. Yet the simple fact of who I was started to feel loose, a coat that no longer fit. The woman in the chair made a sound, a low gasp, and I felt the last of my purpose slip away into the sudden, suffocating quiet. My eye opened to the same blackness. It was a thick, pressing void that felt heavy on my skin. I did not move. My first conscious thought was to listen. My own breathing was ragged in my ears, a rough noise in a world that was otherwise completely still. The floor was concrete and cold, its chill seeping through the thin fabric of my shirt. Then I heard it. Another set of lungs pulling in air. A breath that was shallower and quicker than my own. It was close. I catalogued the sounds, my body acting on an instinct my mind could not name. There was my breath, her breath, and the faint electrical buzz of something small and dying. I remained perfectly still, a predator or prey, I did not know which. She shifted, a soft scrape of fabric on concrete, a motion that tried to make her smaller. Through the oppressive dark, a single pinprick of red light blinked into existence. It pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, just bright enough to illuminate the curve of a machine and the wide, white shine of another person's eyes staring back at me. The silence stretched between us, held taut by the rhythmic beat of the red light. It was a stalemate in the dark, a contest of nerve. She broke it first, her voice a dry whisper that barely disturbed the air. "I don't know who you are. I don't know who I am." I saw no weapon in the faint outline of her hands. I patted down my own body, my hands finding the empty pockets of my jeans and the rough texture of my shirt. There was nothing, no wallet, no keys, no identity. I met her unseen gaze, and my own voice came out flat, a tool for conveying information. Doesn't matter. Who we were is dead. The only thing that counts is what we do now. The truce, fragile as it was, allowed for movement. I rose to my feet slowly, my muscles stiff. Guided by a memory that lived in my hands, I moved toward the perimeter of the room. I found the door, a single slab of thick steel set into the concrete. My fingers traced the edges, feeling for the thick rubber seals, pressing on them to test their integrity. They were solid. The air in here was safe, for now. My gaze swept the room, what little I could see of it. Wooden crates were stacked high against one wall. In the intermittent pulse of the red light, I could just make out the word stenciled on the side, caduceus. Emergency rations. While I secured the edges of our prison, the woman moved towards its center. She went to the large machine that held the blinking red light, a large air filtration unit. It also had a caduceus logo, this one with the words, Advanced Life Support, printed below it. She ran her hands over its metal casing, her attention drawn to something specific. I watched her trace the outline of an access panel. She stopped, her fingers lingering on the screw heads. I saw it then too. The screws were mismatched, some flathead, some Phillips, and the metal of the panel itself was cleaner than the dust-caked casing around it. She looked at it for a long time before turning away, but her eyes kept flicking back to it. She knew something, or had found something, and she was keeping it. We had inventoried our world. It was a box with a sealed door, some food, some water, and a broken air filter. We were left with nothing but our confinement and the gaping hole where our lives used to be. The woman broke the silence again, her voice still quiet, but now with a sharp edge of purpose. She pointed toward the large machine. "That panel. It's wrong. It's not a repair." It's a hiding place. I looked at it again, seeing it through her eyes. The mismatched screws, the clean metal. She was right. It was a deliberate flaw in an otherwise perfect system. It was a lead. I walked over and examined the panel myself. There was no handle, just a thin seam. I used my fingernails to pry at one edge. It was tight. Prying it open with my bare hands, we found a small metal lockbox wedged into the space behind, cushioned by thick foam. The box was heavy in my hands, its steel cold and absolute. A small combination lock was fastened to the front, its 3 tumblers all set to 0. The lock was sturdy, a simple and effective piece of steel. My first instinct was to find something heavy, a piece of concrete, anything, and smash the mechanism until it broke. It was the most direct path to the answers inside. I started to scan the floor for a tool. "Stop." Her voice was sharp. I looked at her. "Don't. Brute force is sloppy. You could destroy whatever is in there." She stood with her arms crossed, a clear challenge to my method. "What good are answers," she asked, "if we turn them into pulp and metal shards?" Her caution had merit, but we had nothing to pick the lock with. We were 2 opposing ideas trapped in a room. I needed her observation, and she needed my strength. We were stuck with each other. A compromise was the only way forward. I kept scanning the room, but this time for something that could be used with more precision. Near the base of the concrete wall, a short length of rebar was sticking out from the foundation, left over from the construction. I worked it back and forth until the concrete crumbled and the metal came free. It was about 2 feet long, heavy and solid. I brought it back to the box and held it up. She looked at the lock, then at the hinges on the back of the box. "Not the lock," she said. "The pins. Pry at the hinge pins. That's the weakest point." I knelt down, placing the box on the floor. I jammed the sharp end of the rebar into the small space of the top hinge, just as she directed. I put my weight into it, levering it back. The metal groaned under the strain, a high-pitched protest. I pushed harder, my muscles burning with the effort. With a final sickening shriek of tortured metal, the hinge pin snapped. I did the same to the bottom hinge. It gave way with a loud crack that echoed in the small room. We had broken it open. By choosing to work together, to combine my force with her intellect, we had committed to this partnership. I lifted the damaged lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed foam, lay the contents of our past, waiting to either save us or to sentence us to death. The low burn of adrenaline left an ache in my muscles and a dry, papery feeling in my throat. We had the box, a small victory that felt hollow the moment it was over. My body reminded me it needed fuel, so I looked at the stacked crates along the wall. I found the pocket knife inside the box, a simple tool with a short blade that felt familiar in my hand. I used it to pry open a can, the metal lid curling back to reveal sliced peaches in a thick syrup. The sweet smell filled the small space. I offered the can to her first, and she watched my hand for a long moment before she took it. Her fingers were careful not to touch mine. We ate with our hands, a slow and deliberate act that seemed to drain the last of the tension from the room. The silence between us changed from a weapon to a shared space, a simple pause in the middle of our confusion. For a few minutes, we were just 2 people eating canned fruit in a concrete room, and the quiet was a kind of truce. When the can was empty, I set it down on the floor with a soft metallic sound. The small lockbox was still between us. It was time to see what we had earned. I tipped the box over, and its contents slid out onto the concrete. The first thing was a laminated card with my own face staring back at me from behind clear plastic. The name printed below it was Jason Dalka, and the title was Investigative Journalist. The name felt like a coat that almost fit. I saw a second photograph, this one old and creased, showing the woman with a small child, but their faces were faded and triggered nothing inside me. There was a final item, a glossy photograph printed on thick paper. Min reached for it before I did. She picked it up and held it in the dim light from the single bulb overhead. I watched her expression shift from curiosity to a deep, gut-wrenching horror. Her breath caught in her throat, and she dropped the picture as if it were on fire. It landed face up on the floor. I picked it up and I saw her face, the face of the woman sitting 3 feet away from me. It was bruised along one cheekbone, and her eyes were wide with a terror that felt real enough to touch. She was crying. I leaned closer to the image, looking at the reflection captured in the dark pools of her eyes. It was distorted by the curve of her cornea, but I could clearly see the shape of a man holding a camera. I could see my own face, cold and focused, as I captured her pain. She scrambled backward, away from me, her hands pushing against the floor until her back hit the far wall. My own hands felt like they belonged to a stranger, to the monster in the picture. I had to show her I wasn't a threat now, whatever I had been before. I stood up slowly and turned my pockets inside out, letting the contents fall to the ground between us. A wallet that held nothing but lint, a cheap plastic pen, a thin white keycard with a magnetic strip. It made a sharp plastic sound as it hit the concrete. Min stopped moving, and her eyes fixed on the card. She recognized it. She told me it was her employee ID for a company named Caduceus, and she thought it might work on the door. She pointed to a small electronic panel next to the lock that I had not noticed before. I picked up the card, my fingers trembling slightly, and I walked to the door while she watched me from the safety of the far wall. I slid the card through the narrow slot. There was a loud clang as a heavy magnetic lock disengaged. The steel door swung inward on silent hinges, opening a path out of the basement. We both stared into the darkness beyond. A different kind of air drifted in, stale and thick with the smell of decay. We were looking into a print shop, a place filled with the large, silent shapes of old machinery, and everything was covered in a uniform layer of fine gray dust. Through the shop's shattered front window, I could see the street outside. The sky was a sickly, washed-out yellow, and the city beyond was perfectly still, a collection of silent buildings under a dead sky. The awful truth of our situation settled on me. I had not just locked her away from the world, I had locked us into the last safe place while the world itself had died. The loud, metallic sound of the door opening had echoed through the quiet street, a sharp report in an otherwise silent world. As I stood, mesmerized by the ruin outside, I heard a new sound, a rhythmic and mindless pounding that started on the print shop's front entrance. Min moved with a sudden, shocking speed. She grabbed a length of rebar that was leaning against a stack of boxes. I thought she was preparing to fight whatever was coming, but she was not looking toward the source of the sound. She was looking at me. Her face was set with a hard, tactical certainty. She lunged forward and shoved me with all her strength. I stumbled backward across the threshold, back into the familiar darkness of the basement. The heavy steel door slammed shut, and I heard the bolt slide into place with a sound of absolute finality. I was alone in the dark again. The pounding from outside the print shop grew louder, more frantic. I heard the distinct sound of reinforced glass shattering, followed by a choked scream that was unmistakably hers. I threw my weight against the door, but it was solid steel and did not budge. I was a prisoner again, listening to her fight for her life just a few feet away. I braced myself to charge the door, a hopeless and desperate idea, when the sounds of her struggle stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard the metallic scrape of the bolt being pulled back. The door was yanked open. She stood in the frame, her face pale, her chest heaving. The rebar was gone. Her eyes were wide with the terror that had burned away her anger at me. She screamed my name, a single word that was not an accusation but a raw plea for help. We slammed the door together, our bodies a single frantic machine of survival. I shot the bolt home just as a heavy impact struck the other side of the steel. The pounding began again, this time on our door, heavy and relentless. We were trapped together once more. The adrenaline washed away, leaving the raw, ugly truth of our past hanging in the air between us. She was trembling, leaning against the wall for support. Why? Her voice was a broken whisper. The question seemed to pull fragments of memory to the surface of my mind. The investigation, the name Caduceus, the deep, paranoid certainty that she was part of a conspiracy. I tried to explain it to her, the words feeling clumsy and insane now. I pulled the worn photograph from my jacket pocket, the one of my wife and daughter, and I told her about another company, another cover-up that I had failed to stop. I told her I thought she was destroying evidence that could have prevented another disaster. She listened, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Then she told me about her son and the threats they had made against him. She told me she was trying to sabotage the project from the inside. We were two people who had been pointed at each other by forces we did not understand. As we stood there, with the dead pounding on our door, I noticed a small red light blinking on the side of the air filtration unit. It was a steady, repeating pattern. I had not seen it before. Min saw it too, and she made a small sound in her throat. She knew what it meant.
"That's a critical power failure alarm,"
she whispered.
"The main unit's been offline for hours."
In that moment, everything coalesced. The failed generator, the compromised air supply, our wiped memories. My violent paranoia had driven me to build this prison, a place to hold her until I could force out a truth that I believed would save the world. That prison had become our ark when the world actually ended, and the ark's own failure was the reason we woke up as strangers, blind to the crime that bound us together and ignorant of the catastrophe that had saved us. The small red light blinked with a terrible rhythm, a heartbeat for a dying machine. The generator had failed, and the air we were breathing was the cause of our blank minds. My prison had become our tomb and our salvation all at once, a perfect circle of irony that did nothing to stop the pounding on the door. The wood was beginning to splinter, long cracks spidering out from the bolt. We had minutes, maybe less. I looked at Min, and the truth of what I had done was a physical weight in the room, heavier than the concrete walls. I saw a length of metal pipe on the floor near a crate, something she must have dropped when she ran back for me. I picked it up, and its cold weight felt deserved. I walked over to her and held it out, the handle pointed toward her. "My name is Jason Dalka. I did that to you." My voice was flat, a simple statement of a fact that no longer seemed to matter as much as the splintering wood. What we were is over. She watched my face for a long time, her eyes searching for something I could not give her. The door groaned under another heavy blow, and a piece of the frame broke away. Her hand closed around the pipe, and her knuckles brushed against mine. She did not pull away. She just gripped the steel and gave a single, sharp nod. The door buckled inward, the lock about to fail completely. There was no time to talk. Min looked up at the metal shelving against the wall, her gaze following it up to where a wide ventilation duct opened near the ceiling. She pointed at it with the pipe, then pointed at me. I understood. She moved with a fluid speed that felt out of place in the cramped room. She scrambled onto a crate, then up the shelves, her feet finding holds where I saw none. I stood by the door. The only weapon I had now was my own body and the choke point of the doorway. The wood finally gave way with a sound like a rifle shot, and the door blew open. The first one came through, a man in the tattered remains of a mail carrier's uniform. His eyes were empty, and he moved with a jerky, unnatural speed. I met him in the doorway, my shoulder driving into his chest, and we went down in a tangle of limbs. His hands clawed at my face, and I felt a hot, mindless strength in his grip. I slammed his head against the concrete floor again and again until he went limp. I scrambled back to my feet just as a loud clang echoed from the back of the room. The second echo, a woman in a torn business suit, had been moving toward me, but now she turned toward the sound of Min kicking the inside of the ventilation shaft. It gave me the second I needed. I grabbed the dead man's leg and twisted, using his body as a weight to trip the woman as she passed. She fell hard, and Min dropped from the shelves, landing almost silently behind her. Before the echo could get up, Min brought the pipe down with both hands in a single, brutal arc. There was a wet, cracking sound, and then there was silence. We stood over them, breathing hard in the dim light. Blood was warm on my cheek, and I didn't know if it was mine or theirs. We did not speak. We moved through the broken doorway and into the print shop above. The air here was stale, and everything was covered in a thick coat of fine gray powder. Light filtered through the grime on the large front window, illuminating the still, silent shapes of the old machines. The street outside was empty and quiet. We stepped through the shattered glass of the front door and onto the pavement. The world was utterly still. Abandoned cars sat in the street, and the buildings were like gravestones, everything coated in that same lifeless dust. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket over a dead city. Then, far down the block, I saw movement. An armored truck, clean and black, was parked in the middle of the road. Figures in pristine tactical gear stood around it, their movements professional and sure. As we watched, one of them raised a rifle and fired a single clean shot. A lone figure, a scavenger rooting through a car, collapsed without a sound. The men in tactical gear never broke stride. They were not fighting for their lives. They were cleaning. A new kind of cold settled in my gut. Without a word, without a thought, I felt Min's presence behind me. We moved at the same time, our backs finding each other, my left and her right shoulder blades pressing together. It was a practiced, instinctive motion, a defensive posture I knew in my bones but had never made before. She held the pipe low and ready. I scanned one end of the empty street and she scanned the other.